Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Alice Ford, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about Zion National Park in Utah. Now, I actually just recently went to Zion National Park for my third time. Zion is now the fifth most visited park in the entire country, and it's obviously the most visited one in the entire state of Utah. So with so many people traveling to this national park and the national parks in Utah, I thought I would put together a little bit of a guide here to give you everything that you need to know if you're going to be visiting this national park. The first time I ever visited Zion was on a cold February week, and it was when I was actually filming my first ever national park video for YouTube, which you guys can check out. It's one of my older videos, but it's still one of my most favorite. Actually, I got to go to Death Valley on the way over to Zion and then hit Bryce Canyon on the way out as well. And this is one of my favorite national park road trips, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we get into the video. And you may notice that I have some tape on my shoulder. I actually recently was injured. I've currently got a sling and I'm just going to be home doing a lot more videos from here in the studio, but I will be also sharing some more stuff about this injury, how I got it, and what recovery is like over on my Patreon page. So if you guys aren't members yet of my Patreon page, there's a link in the description here where you can actually go and check that out, become a member, and I give away swag on there, and I'm going to have a lot of Q&As and other information that I'm not sharing here on YouTube. So I'd love if you guys came and join me over there on Patreon. And if you're just watching this channel for the first time, make sure you also hit subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on those bell notifications because I'm always sharing great content about hiking, trekking, national parks, and great places for you to find some travel inspiration. If you've never visited Zion and you're planning your first trip there, let me just say that the first time I ever went to Zion, I was absolutely mesmerized. I was blown away. You know, you drive through the desert for a long time and these kind of really arid landscapes, and then all of a sudden, basically out of nowhere, you see these towering sandstone cliffs that just kind of, they kind of appear like a mirage. And when you walk into Zion and there's these verdant valleys and super tall, towering cliff sides with beautiful colors, you will be absolutely in awe, just the way that I was. One of the great things about Zion is that you can actually visit any time of year. But my favorite times to go are actually early in the spring or late in the fall. But the most popular time to visit is probably late spring and summer. But keep in mind, if you're traveling in the summer months, you'll have to do some planning, not only to get into the park, but to also see the main attractions. Summer is actually my least favorite time to visit Zion. While it may be very convenient for a lot of travelers, there are actually a lot of drawbacks to visiting at this time of year. Number one, it's way busier in the park in the summertime. Number two, there's the possibility of flash floods. And if you missed the recent news at the beginning of July, there was actually a really devastating flash flood that wiped away some of the parking lots, some of the campgrounds. It also took out lots of businesses in the town of Springdale. Some of the hotels were very heavily damaged, some of the restaurants. And there were lots of people actually kind of stuck in their campers or stuck in these parking lots where they had parked for a long time waiting to get dug out from all the different debris that got washed down this one canyon. So flash floods are a real danger, and they're a lot more prevalent in the summer months as well. Also in the summer, it's extremely hot. Temperatures can easily surpass 100 degrees. Now, I know that you've seen photos of Zion as this lush, beautiful place, but it is a high desert environment. So the temperatures, especially in the summer months when it's dry and hot, are extreme. And you can easily get heat stroke or another heat-related sickness or illness while you're in the park at this time of year. So if you are definitely someone that is, more susceptible to the heat, I would recommend finding another season to go. You're not going to want to be on trails, midday in this type of season. And you're also probably going to see less animals in the summer too. One of the last issues with summer travel is that you're actually going to have higher prices at pretty much all the lodging and accommodation sites. It's going to be harder to get a campsite. You're also going to have a hard time getting a rental car, especially in 2021, since rental cars are pretty hard to come by across the country. But whatever season you decide to travel in, Springdale is going to be your base of operations, and I'm going to get more into the logistics of your trip in just a sec. I have to tell you guys about a new website I've been using to get all of my household and travel essentials. So if you need to stock up on these things, you're going to want to check out Public Goods. Public Goods sells food and household essentials that are good for people and the planet. They've already planted more than 200,000 trees. They're also offsetting their carbon emissions from shipping, donating their excess food and toiletries to shelters and other nonprofits. So if you're looking to ditch plastic, reduce waste, or just shop from a store that gives back to the planet, you're gonna love Public Goods as much as I am. Now, for my last road trip, I actually got all of my essentials, toiletries like shampoo and conditioner bars made from natural ingredients, and some of my favorite road trip and camping snacks like banana chips, marshmallows, coffee, and chips and salsa. But they've got everything you need to keep your house clean, to keep your life organized, and to keep your travel going great. So check out Public Goods, and I've even got a code in the description for a little bit of a percentage off just for you. So the main entrance to Zion is located in the town of Springdale. And for most of you, this will be your base of operations for dining and for staying while visiting the park. Now, Springdale is a great town with a really great selection of restaurants. There's plenty of lodging to choose from. And there's a plethora of campgrounds as well, both in Springdale and in some of the surrounding areas and towns as well. There's also hotels, motels, and even some glamping resorts where you can stay. The best place to stay, in my opinion, is if you can snag a room at the Zion Lodge. Now, this is actually the only hotel in the national park, and it's in an absolutely beautiful area. There's a restaurant there, and your rooms, almost all of them, have just spectacular views of the big canyons in Zion. You're more likely to see deer and other wildlife, and it will allow you to drive your car into the park, which is not for everyone in the summer months, but we'll get into that in a sec. I actually got to stay at the Zion Lodge on my last trip to Zion, and I think it was probably my favorite experience in the park, just because I could get up super early and then just walk across the street to go hiking. And, in the middle of the day, I could go and change my clothes or refresh. I didn't have to worry about leaving the park, taking the shuttle, and then getting all the way back in. I could have a lot more flexibility in my day by staying at the lodge. Rooms there are around $250 a night, and they have pretty much just the standard hotel amenities there. There's not a pool or a hot tub, but you do have that park access, which I think speaks for itself. Now, if you're planning on camping or spending the night in your RV, you're going to want to make reservations far in advance, especially if you're planning on going in these busier months of the year, because reservations book up sometimes months in advance, sometimes the year before. So you'll want to make sure that you definitely look ahead of time. And specifically if you're looking for, the busy months or holiday weekends, stuff's going to book up really quickly. Even the group reservation sites book up really far in advance. So it's always good to do some planning. And if you don't have the time to plan, I would recommend trying to go on a weekday and, trying to go on non-holiday weekends on less busy months of the year as well. Even if you can't get an RV or camping reservation in the park, there are a ton of campgrounds that you can stay at all around the borders of the park. You can stay between Zion and Bryce. You can stay, on the northern side, on the southern side. So there's a lot of options. I really like using Hip Camp, which is an app on your phone that you can find all kinds of paid and unpaid campgrounds all over the US. As far as other places to stay outside Springdale, if you're okay with driving, there are actually a lot of other neighboring towns. One of those is St. George, which is about an hour from the park. Another place that you can stay is Kanab, which is on the other side of Zion, but also has a really large amount of lodging options, and it's great if you're going to explore more of Utah after your visit to Zion. I've actually stayed in both of these towns, and I will say that there's lots of options in both of them. St. George is actually on basically the California side of the park. So if you're driving in from this side of the country, that's a really great option for you as a place to stay. And it's very desert-like in St. George and really hot in many parts of the year. But there's lots of places to stay, lots of the name brand hotels. I even had my first solo camping trip in the desert of the Red Cliffs outside St. George, so I really like that area, but know that it is extremely warm. And over in Kanab on the other side of the park, you're going to have a lot of mom and pop hotels, bed and breakfast, and there's some really great restaurants. There's also a ton of like outdoor adventure outfitters over in Kanab where you can, go dune buggy riding or rent four-wheel drive trucks and lots of other like desert adventure. So that's a really great place if you're looking for other activities to do after you visit Zion as well. Now, much like all the national parks in the United States, Zion does have an entry fee. It's $35 per vehicle, $20 if you're walking. And my recommendation is that you splurge the $80 and you get a yearly national park pass. This is actually good at every national park in the United States for 1 year, and it will take everyone in your vehicle into the park. And especially if you're going to a national park for multiple days, or you're planning on even going to 2 or 3 in a year, this is like so valuable. I've been renewing my national park pass for the last 6 or 7 years, and it's one of my favorite yearly purchases because it's so valuable to be able to see these places, and it's really not that expensive. There are 2 caveats to the National Park Pass. One is if you have a child in 4th grade, your 4th grader can actually get a National Park Pass for free for the year they're in 4th grade. And also, people in the military can also get in free. You'll just usually have to either stop at the gate or the visitor center to apply for that. Okay, so what about permits? While you won't need a permit for any of the popular hikes or areas of the park, you do need to obtain a wilderness permit if you plan on doing the Narrows from the top down, which is usually an overnight hike, if you want to do the subway in either direction, or if you plan on overnight backpacking, canyoneering, or rock climbing. So many of the national parks over the last few years have been implementing entry requirements or ticketing systems for entry. Zion, however, doesn't have any entry requirements as of the making of this video, that is, but they do have a shuttle service that runs from about mid-March to mid-October. Now, this shuttle takes you down Canyon Drive and starts at the visitor center, the main visitor center that is in Springdale. And vehicles are not allowed in this section of the park between this period of time. Now, this is to cut down on not only cars in the park and protect animals, but also to protect the air there, to reduce the amount of air pollution from all the cars driving through this narrow canyon where pollution would easily get trapped. This window from March to October seems to gradually be getting longer and longer every year as more people visit the park. So it's always best to check with the park or check the park website if you are visiting, in the beginning of spring or even the end of fall, to see when the window opens and closes so that you can kind of plan your trip accordingly. The route that the shuttle bus takes is down Canyon Drive, as I said. This is the main thoroughfare of the park where you're going to find the trails like the Narrows, Emerald Pools, and Angel's Landing. So it is where the bulk of people go when they're exploring the park. There's a couple other areas of the park as well, but in order to use the shuttle service, what you're going to do is basically park at the visitor center in Springdale, wait in line for the shuttle, and it stops at a bunch of different stops throughout Canyon Drive, and it runs most of the day. I think the first shuttle is about 5:30 in the morning, but obviously check with the visitor center or the park website for your specific time that you're visiting to make sure you know when the first bus is and the last bus is, because you don't want to get stranded. Another option to get into the park during shuttle bus season is to walk or bike into the park. And I will say it's not super far from the town of Springdale. So one of the things that I recommend is either bringing or renting an e-bike. I actually did this on my last trip and had a ton of fun. It's a super convenient way to get into the park. Canyon Drive is only about, I believe, 8 miles each way, so it's not super long. And you do add a few miles from the visitor center. But from your hotel in Springdale, there is a free town shuttle that will actually take you to the visitor center. And then from there, you can ride down the road and then into Canyon Drive. So it's not a super long commute, obviously longer for walkers, but I would recommend renting an e-bike. It's a super easy, convenient way. E-bikes are great because they actually give you help getting up hills. So it's really minimal effort. Just make sure you bring a bike lock with you to keep safe. You might be wondering how many days you need to explore Zion. And while you can certainly drive the scenic drives in a day, I would recommend spending 2 to 3 full days in the park. And this is especially if you plan on hiking, because there are a lot of great hikes, but a lot of them are going to take you a couple hours. And if you really want to see the park in full, you're going to want several full days here to explore it. So Zion is actually split up into 3 distinct areas. The one most people visit is the area around Canyon Drive, where you'll find the Narrows, Angel's Landing, and Emerald Pools. But if you continue driving east on Route 9 past the main drive, you're going to reach the eastern section of the park, which has some absolutely stunning hiking and is really a completely different landscape than the one you're going to see in the main area. You also get to go through the Zion Tunnel when you go to the eastern side, and this tunnel was actually built by hand. It's one of the longest man-made tunnels in the country, if not the longest man-made tunnel in the country, and it's actually really cool. And when you go through the tunnel, it's like going from one ecosystem to a completely different one. So I highly recommend checking out this area. And if you're going to go to Bryce Canyon, this is actually the route that you will take. So I always recommend to everyone to go to Zion and then Bryce because they're pretty close together. And Bryce is also a wonderful park. As I said earlier, you can check out my video on Zion and Bryce and all the things to do in the parks from one of my older trips there, and the link for that is in the description as well. Now, another section of the park which most people overlook is called Kolob Canyon. Now, Kolob Canyon is actually located about 40 miles from the main entrance in Springdale. It's north of the park, it's got its own entrance, and it's not connected to the main area of the park. So most people either don't even know about it or don't spend the time to visit it because it is a drive away from that main entrance to the park. There's actually no shuttle service for this area either, so you do have to self-drive your way there. It has its own scenic drive in Kolob Canyon as well, and there's some absolutely beautiful hiking here. You're actually kind of on, obviously, the northern side of the park, but also the back of a lot of these monolithic sandstone canyons and cliff sides. So you get to see like a completely different landscape. There's riverbeds and trees, and it was one of my favorite areas of the park when I visited a couple of years ago. You can check out more of that in the video I mentioned before as well, and I've also put a lot more information over on my blog, alicesadventuresonearth.com as well. Okay, so now that we've talked about the logistics of getting to the park and where you're going to stay, let's talk about what you're going to do when you get there, because there is a lot of options, especially if you're a hiker, but even if you're not a hiker, there's lots of places to explore. So we're starting this list with one of the most infamous hikes in Zion, which is Angel's Landing. I'm sure you've heard of it because many people say it's one of the most dangerous hikes in the United States as far as national parks go. And I've done it myself, although not all the way to the top. I actually have another video you guys can watch if you want to see this whole experience, but hiking this is definitely not for everyone. Basically, this hike takes you up to a really narrow ledge where you're going to be following chains that take you up to a very prominent peak that's also very narrow, where you're going to be able to look down and see all of Zion. Now, it's absolutely stunning up there, but it's definitely very nerve-wracking and not recommended for people that are afraid of heights. Sadly, there are actually several deaths every year from people that fall off the chain section of the Narrows, and even people that fall off from the Scouts Lookout area. Now, I recommend if you want to see this area that you hike up to Scouts Lookout, which is about 3/4 of the way up the trail. And this is where the chain section begins. And it's a great place for you to turn around as well if you don't want to go on the chain section of the hike, which I don't blame you. Whichever you decide to do, just make sure you start early. I would recommend starting this hike around 6 a.m., especially if you're going in the busier summer months or spring and fall, which are also really busy as well. So just start early and make sure you bring a lot of water because there's nowhere to fill up on the way up either. Now, this hike actually gets really backed up. Sometimes there's lines on the chain sections. Sometimes there's lines going up just some of the switchbacks on the trail, which is why you need to start early. I'm actually hoping that this hike is going to become permitted in the next couple of years because from what I've seen with the increase in people visiting this park, it's getting really dangerous because of the crowds. So hopefully we'll see some changes taking place in the next couple of years, because too many people are dying on this area, if you ask me. Now, another option for exploring this area, if you don't want to do this hike, is the longer Observation Point hike, which is about 8 miles and actually takes you up on top of a canyon that looks down on Angel's Landing, and you've got about a 270-degree view from up there. It's absolutely stunning, but obviously it is longer, so you're gonna want to start a little bit earlier and bring a lot more water for yourself as well. Another jewel of the park is the Emerald Pools Trail. This trail is just down from the scenic drive from the starting point of Angel's Landing, and will take you to a series of desert oases, which are all separated by lush vegetation and waterfalls. It's great for kids, people in wheelchairs, and even the elderly, as it follows along a nicely paved trail, but there is a significant amount of incline, just so you know. Another one of my favorite trails is the Weeping Rock. Now, this was actually closed on my last visit in 2021 because there was a really big rock fall that actually prevents you from continuing up this trail and made it a bit dangerous. I'm not sure when or if it's going to reopen, but basically the awesome thing about this trail was that it takes you to see water seeping directly out from inside a rock. So it's a really cool geologic feature, and it actually takes the water thousands of years for it to come out of this basically like spring within the rock. So hopefully it reopens sometime soon because it's one of my favorite hikes as well. And it's really short, so it's great for everyone in your party, regardless of whether or not they're a hiker. Most visitors to the park are also going to want to do the Narrows. Now, I've done the Narrows. It's beautiful. The super unique thing about this trail is the fact that you're actually in a river, walking upstream, and that's what makes this hike so unique and why so many people want to do it. It's definitely gotten way, way busier over the years. When I went, I actually did it in February, which was cold, but I only saw 3 other people on the entire day, which made the experience even more special. So to tell you a little bit more about this trail, you are walking up through a slot canyon, and it starts out in an area where the canyon is pretty wide and then gradually gets narrower and narrower. Depending on the time when you're visiting, you may need some gear. So for winter visitors, you can rent dry suits and other gear at plenty of outfitters in town, but in the summer months, you'll just need some waterproof shoes and your sense of adventure. One of the things to note with the Narrows is it is a slot canyon, and there's actually a lot of safety that goes in to being in a slot canyon. You're absolutely going to want to check the weather reports. There's also signage at the beginning of the Narrows that the Park Service puts. Please pay attention to that and do not disregard it. If it says that the flood danger is high, do not go into the Narrows. It is extremely dangerous to be in a slot canyon when there's rain, when there may be rain, 100 miles north of the area. If there had been rain the day before, these are all really dangerous times for you to go into a slot canyon because at any time a flash flood could come from really out of nowhere and wash you out of the slot canyon and hurtle rocks and logs and other like really heavy and dangerous debris at you. There's pretty much no easy way to survive being in a flash flood in a slot canyon, so please do not do it. For the last 2 years, the Virgin River, which is the river that goes through the Narrows and through most of the park, has also been contaminated with cyanobacteria. Now, if you have little kids or pets, you're going to want to keep them away from the rivers. You also want to make sure that you and no one in your party submerges yourself in the water, and you don't want to drink the water. This also goes for even filling up a water bottle with a filter, because the filters are not going to filter out enough of the cyanobacteria to make it drinkable. So make sure you just stay away from the river as far as ingesting it or getting it in your eyes, nose, or mouth, as this bacteria is extremely harmful, especially to small children and pets. And I've got one hike for the real adventurers. This hike is called the Subway, and no, it's not a form of transportation that gets you to point A to point B, but it is a really, really cool adventure. The Subway is a hike of sorts, which takes you through some subterranean cave systems, many of which are filled with water depending on the time of year. Now, this adventure requires ropes and experience and will have you swimming, rappelling, holding your breath, and hiking. This is best to do with either an outdoor adventure outfitter or a group, and is only allowed via permit, which you'll have to get at either the backcountry office or the visitor center. Now, one of my favorite hikes is also Canyon Overlook. This is actually past the Zion Tunnel on the eastern side of the park, and this hike is built into the side of a canyon and has some absolutely beautiful views of the park. A few other things you should keep in mind while visiting Zion are that parking lots tend to fill up really quickly, especially after 10 a.m. So I recommend trying to get to the park as early as you possibly can, and obviously leave early. If you're in Springdale, you can actually take that town shuttle directly from your hotel, if you're staying in Springdale, to the visitor center to get on the shuttle. So that's a little bit of an easy hack so that you don't have to deal with waiting in line at the park entrance and then finding a parking spot in the main parking lot either. Weather in Zion can vary drastically during any season, so you'll want to make sure that you always have layers for everyone in your party. Even in the summer months, you'll want something to protect yourself against the really hot sun rays, and also in case of rain. And in the winter time, or even in the spring and fall, temperatures can range from 30 degrees Fahrenheit at night to the high of 80 during the day. So you'll want to have a variety of different things to keep you warm, cool, or dry. Regardless of the season, also, you're going to want to have extra water. I've already mentioned this a few times, but it doesn't hurt to mention it a few more times, because I've seen people running out of water on every trail I've ever been on in every type of climate. Zion does get extremely hot. Make sure you have more water than you think you need, and that you have more water for everyone in your party. There are very few places to actually fill up in Zion. You can fill up most of the time at the Zion Lodge. On my last visit there weren't any other places to fill up your water bottles. As I said, the river system is contaminated, so you can't fill up water in the river systems, even with a filter. Many of the restrooms also have vending machines and also places you can refill your water. But during COVID, a lot of these were closed. So just make sure you have enough water. I recommend bringing a water bladder and just carrying a backpack with you so that you don't become dehydrated. If you happen to be traveling with your furry friend, which I know a lot of us are these days, know that you can't take your dog into most of the places in the park, but dogs are allowed on public roads and parking areas, as well as on the Parias Trail and in developed campgrounds and picnic areas. Dogs, however, are not allowed on any other trails or wilderness areas, on shuttle buses, or in public buildings. And this is pretty standard at most of the national parks. So if you're an RV traveler or someone else that just happens to be traveling with their dog, there's not a lot of places you can really take your dog as far as trails go in most of the national parks. Luckily, in the town of Springdale, there are some great doggy daycares, so just make sure you are always traveling with your dog's updated records and list of shots. Okay, guys, I think you're well on your way to having a really great trip to Zion, and I hope I've answered a lot of your questions on how to get there and what to do. But I also wanted to mention a couple places that I think you'll want to add to your trip that are in the area. One of those is the Coral Pink Sand Dunes. Now, this is pretty close to Zion, especially if you're going to go and stay in Kanab. And these sand dunes are really awesome. They're obviously pink, as the name implies, and they go on for really long ways. One of the cool things about this state park is that you can actually ride off-road vehicles here, which is pretty rare for sand dunes, and it's a really fun experience, so highly recommend that. There's another state park as well called Snow Canyon State Park. This state park has a lot of hiking trails. There's places to bike. You can ride a horse there. And it's a really interesting Mars-like landscape with a lot of varied colors, and it's just beautiful as well. Then, of course, if you have the time, you can hit some of the other national parks in Utah. The Big Five, obviously Zion is one, Bryce Canyon is the other, then you have Canyonlands, Arches, and Capitol Reef National Parks. Now, I've been to all of these, but I haven't spent a ton of time in Capitol Reef or Canyonlands. But if you have the time to do a couple weeks in Utah, I highly recommend checking them all out. If you're looking for some more information on visiting Zion, you can check out some of the other videos I have on exploring this national park, from e-biking Canyon Drive to hiking Angel's Landing, to my big overview of exploring not only Zion, but Bryce Canyon and Death Valley from California in some of my other videos. The links are in the description for those, and I hope that this video was really helpful for you guys if you're planning your trip to Zion. This, as I said, is one of my favorite national parks. It's absolutely beautiful, and it is rising in popularity, so if you can get there as soon as you can and experience this wonderful place. If you guys enjoyed this video and it was helpful, please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, turn on those bell notifications, and stay tuned for another video coming out very soon. As always, I'm Alice Ford, and never stop exploring.